the sponsored session by DMI. And you all know Simone, so no introductions needed. Simone, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Hello again. Yeah, as I said earlier, I'm the CEO of Gefyra. We are a small company in Germany, providing education, training, and consultancy for fire in Germany. And we are part of a bigger group of a larger company called DMI. DMI is a provider who has been around for more than 50 years and provided services to hospitals for archiving and digitizing patient records. The other company that is part of our group is HealthCom, which is a vendor of communication server software for hospitals in Germany, which has also been around for 20+ years. So interoperability and data exchange is pretty much the common denominator in our group of companies, and that's why we are sponsoring DevDays, and that is giving me the paid-for privilege to talk for 30 minutes about whatever I want. And I would like to talk to you about our experiences. So we've been around since 2016. We're the youngest company in our group. And fire is pretty much everything and all we've done. It's the only thing, the only topic that we cover. We are very niche. But it's been quite a journey. It's been 8 years already. And our beginnings were quite humble. In 2016, when we founded the company, it was basically pretty much the occasional training that we did, because people started to get curious about this new fire thing and wanted to know about it. And then we provided them training and basic information. But I think 2018 was about the time when we had the first actual adoptions of fire in Germany. And that's pretty much when we also started to branch out into the consultancy business and try to support people writing implementation guides. And we've been pretty much involved with every project, fire-based project in Germany since then. And in 2023, where are we in Germany? Well, looking back at the development, I think it's amazing what has happened in Germany in these few numbers of years. But it's also interesting that the way we adopt fire in Germany is quite peculiar, because even though we have dozens of specifications out there that I could name on top of my head, there's one of them that I can mention that really uses a RESTful API. All the other implementation guides that we have are mostly document-based. So what we do in Germany is what we have always done. We are exchanging documents, except that now these are FHIR documents, structured documents. The nerds among us know that we have these document bundles with a composition resource that references a couple of observations and a patient and an encounter and the conditions and whatnot. So this is pretty much how FHIR works in Germany, whether it's e-prescription, whether it's the electronic doctor's note, whether it's any document that we put into our electronic health record, it's a document bundle with a lot of different FHIR resources in it. And I think the idea of a document bundle in FHIR originally was that it was part of a workflow, that you would start collecting your patient information during time, and then at some point you would aggregate your information into a document, send it along, and then on the other end, on the receiving end, someone would disassemble the document and continue working with the information. But this kind of process is broken for us in Germany, because we started with the document. We didn't start with the individual FHIR resources that then eventually could be aggregated into a document and sent along. We started with the document out of nowhere. So rather than just aggregating stuff that's already there, our industry, our vendors have to create these FHIR documents from scratch. And they are quite complicated. These are huge documents. We have specifications that have 150 profiles in them. And creating that out of nothing is quite an enormous challenge for our vendors. And then on the other end, we have the issue that in many of our use cases, these documents are, when we put them into our electronic health records, they are encrypted on client side. So the server that receives these documents and theoretically could use all the structured information to do wonderful things, to analyze, to have decision support on top of it, to run a big data algorithm and whatnot, it's not working because the server only gets an encrypted blob of bytes that it can't do anything with. And there's another problem. In Germany, we are very peculiar about protecting patient information, which is good. But in the context of FHIR, it hugely hampers the reusability of our resources. For example, in our electronic prescription, we are not allowed to put a patient's gender in. Why? Because we never did. When our prescriptions were still a piece of paper, it just didn't have a form field where you would put a patient's gender. And since we only wanted to digitize the process without, remodeling all the regulatory data protection around it, we created a patient resource that constrains patient's gender to 0. However, we have plenty of other use cases in hospitals and in outpatient context that, of course, obviously need a patient's gender because they're in pretty much every other context. It's a very important information. So many of these profiles put the minimum cardinality of gender to 1, making it a required element. For implementers, this means that they're not implementing a patient resource once. They are implementing it dozens of times because in one situation, you're allowed to put gender, in the other, you're not supposed to put gender. In the one scenario, we need the address, in the other, it's forbidden due to data protection regulation. And so we've been thinking about how can we resolve that? Or rather, what would we have done differently knowing what we know now? I mean, it wasn't obvious from the start when we started to adopt FHIR that this is how things would turn out. But now, 8 years later, and looking back at the journey that we've had, what would I recommend to people to do different? If I could turn back time, what would my advice have been? What would I tell someone from a country that has only just starting to adopt FHIR on how to move forward and how to avoid the issues that we are encountering right now? And that's pretty much why I want to talk a little bit about questionnaires. Questionnaires have been around forever in the FHIR community, and we've certainly looked at them. Whenever we approached a new problem, a new scenario, we've been talking about, is this a structured document or might this just be a questionnaire? For the new people out there who don't know what a questionnaire is, it's basically a FHIR resource that allows you to describe a form where you have items and every item has a text and an option or a number of answers that you can give or a string field that you can populate. And it kind of describes a user interface, a form, basically. And we've often asked ourselves, could this be a questionnaire? The answer was always no, because a questionnaire could be anything. You can do whatever you want with your questionnaire. So the danger was that people would only use questionnaires, that was our biggest fear, and not really adopt FHIR, not really adopt the data model and the terminologies and the object-oriented approach that we have, but just basically replicate whatever they did on paper with a FHIR questionnaire. And everyone would tell the world how great we are, that we've used an international standard, but in fact, nothing would change. And the other issue with the questionnaire is you're basically expecting all of your information to be entered by a human, by a nurse, by a practitioner. They are expected to put the information into your forms that you then send along to whoever receives that. On the receiving side, questionnaires are also problematic because you could have the same question asked on different forms with different texts. But basically, it's the same piece of information. But how would you know if the question is phrased differently on multiple questionnaires? And how would you compare this information beyond just a bunch of answers of the same form? How would you reuse this information beyond the scope of one particular paper form that you digitized using a questionnaire? So I guess looking back, we were right to discard the questionnaire resource in many cases. But since then, the questionnaire resource has done leaps, and mostly in form of an implementation guide, which is called Structured Data Capture, for short SDC. Yay. And since I've taken a deeper dive into the SDC implementation guide, I feel like many of our use cases, if not all of them, they could have been a questionnaire. And having a questionnaire could solve a lot of our problems. Because what a structured data capture implementation guide does is it's making questionnaires smarter. It allows you to use a whole bunch of extensions to annotate the items on your questionnaire. For example, to pre-populate them. Like if you have an item, a question on your form where you expect that this information might already be present in the system that you're using to fill out this form, you might just attach a FHIR query to it and try to retrieve the information from the system. And then you use a FHIR path expression pointing at the specific element that you want from the FHIR resource to fill out that specific question in your form. Another important aspect of SDC is data extraction. Like if you receive a filled out questionnaire, how could you extract information in order to reuse it beyond the scope of this particular questionnaire? Like if you're asking a patient about their allergies, you wouldn't want to store that in your questionnaire response because you're expecting that if you query your RESTful API for allergy intolerance resources to get all of the information and not have to dig through tons of questionnaire responses because someone might have put some detail in there that you're not expecting. So on the receiving end of this questionnaire, we would want to create distinct FHIR resources from the information given in this questionnaire. And that's also something that SDC covers. You can annotate the questions that you ask on your questionnaire and the information that you receive and instruct an algorithm on how to create, for example, an observation resource from the information given in the questionnaire. And I've taken a deeper look in the past couple of months into the tools that have been developed since, like questionnaire rendering tools, where you can upload a questionnaire with the items that you just came up with, and it will show you a user interface where you can fill out your form. And it's also working if you put in a FHIR query, like if your item asks for patient's first name, you put in a patient query with it, and then a FHIR path expression that says populate this element with patient.name.given. And the tools will do just that. So ideally, you could have a questionnaire that automatically populates itself completely. And now let's think through our problems in Germany and how an SDC questionnaire could solve them. First of all, most of the documents that we digitized, that we created a structured FHIR document from, were forms in the first place. These were paper-based forms that often had a couple of checkboxes. And now, in a structured document, each and every one of these checkboxes became a full-blown observation resource. So what used to be basically a Boolean value in your paper-based form became a FHIR resource that has at least, let's say, 25 lines of codes. You have a patient reference, you have an encounter reference, you have a date, you have metadata, you have a SNOMED code, you have a value set codable concept response and whatnot. So this is huge in terms of complexity. Whereas on your questionnaire, you could just have an item that says, do you have allergies? Yes or no? And it could be a Boolean value that you report back. So the other thing is that with these structured documents, you often have a bundle with like 150 individual resources. If you fill out a questionnaire, you only get one resource, a questionnaire response that tell you what the answers to the multiple questions were for one specific patient. So transport is a lot easier because you have just one item to take care of and to transport from A to B. Another issue that we have that I forgot to mention earlier, I should have memorized my notes, but I couldn't be bothered. Another issue that I forgot to mention is visualization of our structured documents, because for some reason that I cannot explain, even if I tried, we decided in Germany that we do not need narratives. Who needs narratives if we have structured data? So our hugely complicated documents, they don't have narrative. And in most use cases, the most important thing you do with a document is to display it to your user. But how do you display a document that has 150 different profiles inside of it? That's a huge challenge for our vendors. Visualizing a questionnaire response is easy peasy. You just look at the item link, you look up at the questionnaire definition, you pull the string, what that was actually asked for the patient, you put in the answer, and you basically have key value pairs that you can easily display. And the other important aspect is reusability. If we need, in one use case, only the patient's name and his birth date, in the other use case, we need patient name, birth date, and gender. And in the next use case, we need patient birth date, gender, and address, and phone number. If we use a questionnaire and pre-populate it, you don't have to implement a patient resource over and over again. And paying attention to all these min and max cardinalities. You are implementing your patient resource once, and it will return all the information you have about a specific patient. And you leave it up to the pre-population service to figure out which of these patient elements are needed to populate a specific form. And when you consider that only the populated form, the questionnaire response, is going to leave your organization, you're perfectly fine with all the data protection rules around it. Another aspect that I absolutely love about this approach is that we can distribute the amount of work that we need to do more evenly. It's not just all the primary system vendors that have to create all of these 150 resources and put them in a bundle and put a composition in there and then signature on top and then send it somewhere. We have primary vendors, and all they ever have to do is to implement a read-only, very simple RESTful API where you can query and retrieve the data that already exists in the system in order to pre-populate your questionnaires. Then we have another team of implementers that has to deal with the questionnaire tooling, questionnaire rendering, for example. Create a tool that is able to render any questionnaire regardless of how many items and what kind of items are in there. Then we have another team of implementers, and they could implement pre-population services. It could be the same team doing the rendering, quite often it is, but it might just well be a service that you use. So it's defined as a FHIR operation, so it might as well be two completely different systems sharing the burden. And then you have someone on the receiving end of that document that needs to take only care about data extraction. And this data extraction doesn't even have to be complete. In many use cases, you might just want to do quantitative analysis of the information that's being reported. So You might just as well take your questionnaire response and dump it into a database and do your analytics. No need to extract anything from it. In some cases, extraction might be partial. There might be some information that's only relevant in the context of this form and other information that you might want to reuse. So you extract your allergy intolerance, your observations, your conditions and whatnot, whatever you need. And at the same time, we are able to innovate much faster, assuming that we have all of this ecosystem, we have it in place once, and we have the primary vendors with a RESTful API and the ability to integrate the questionnaire tooling using Smart on FHIR, for example. They're instantly able to display and render and fill out any questionnaire. So if tomorrow there's a new use case, there's a new pandemic, and suddenly we have to report out any information that has never been reported before, and it changes on a weekly basis because we don't know what's important yet for this new infectious disease, like it was with COVID. Like in 1 week, we had to report whether a patient was a smoker, and then it turns out it's not really that important. Instead, we need to report the vitamin D status. Could happen again, right? But in a scenario like this, it doesn't matter how often you change your questionnaires. You don't have to change a single line of code. You just upload a new questionnaire definition and your renderer will display it. Your pre-population service will fill out the existing information and you can extract it on the other end, on the receiving end. And it also gives us the opportunity to mature the primary systems on a slower pace than we have new requirements. We could start filling out a new questionnaire immediately. By the time we receive the questionnaire, we could upload it, render it, and our users could start filling out this form. At first, they probably would have to capture a lot of information manually because the primary system doesn't have the RESTful API yet. Maybe they're not able, maybe they have a facade and they don't support this new resource type yet. Maybe they're not supporting the proper search parameter that you need for your pre-population. But you're still able to report valid data. For a small period of time, your users would have to type in this information manually, but you could report immediately valid information. And then maybe in a few weeks' time, your primary system vendor could bring an update, could run the update, and then it would have additional features on a RESTful API. And what used to be manually entered into the questionnaire is then automatically populated. But I think having the opportunity to innovate quickly about the data that we need to report and allow primary system to catch up at their own pace, I think it's very important. It's important that we are able to quickly adapt to new requirements, to quickly report new information, to support new workflows without having to change a single line of code. And I think that SDC is a huge promise to achieve that. And knowing what I know now, with this implementation guide having matured vastly over the last couple of years and months, and with the tooling that we have right now, I think this could be a great opportunity to quickly implement FHIR and to distribute the burden of implementation for everyone, and to really be able to adapt to new requirements. If anyone asked me how to adopt FHIR, where to start adopting FHIR in a new country, I would suggest to start with that. Make your primary systems implement simple RESTful APIs, get your Smart on FHIR in place so they can integrate the questionnaire tools, and then start rolling out questionnaires, because everyone can participate in day one. Filling out a questionnaire is not difficult. Pre-population service is a bonus that can grow over time, and data extraction is something that a completely different group of implementers can take care about. I'm not sure if that's really the great answer that I think it is. We've never done it. So I don't know what problems we would have encountered had we used SDC from the start. I'm sure there would other issues would come up that we're not thinking of right now. But I highly encourage to entertain the idea that whenever you're looking at a new use case and you're thinking about implementing it based on FHIR, and it kind of tastes like document, consider the questionnaire. But always consider questionnaire in combination with the SDC implementation guide. Whenever you think about questionnaires, always think about how to pre-populate this stuff and how to extract the important and reusable information from it. And I'm really happy to know, to learn, or to talk to and engage with people who have more experience than we do with the implementation of questionnaires. And if you want to learn more about structured data capture, I really recommend Brian's talk tomorrow at, I think, 2:30 about structured documents. Are there any questions?
My mic working? No, yeah, it is. Well, this is what you want to have, right? As oh yeah, we have a question here as well. I was just going to say, this is what you want to have as an event organizer, someone paying to give us a keynote like this. So, gentleman in the back, and then Graham. Is it Isaac or yeah? Go ahead.
Man, that was awesome. Thanks, Simone. I kind of thought that like all of the points you were making about, it's really about the value of REST, right? It's about like the granularity and like, and reusability and shared I don't know, API across different systems that really makes and so do you think that like the same, could you make the same argument about, it's not just, you know, Questionnaires' ability to transform like, you know, discrete data retrieved from REST, but it's also just like smart apps in general as a mechanism to like, to apply like the ability to move faster in one specific area while reusing REST, or maybe even like the, as evidence for the kind of subscription notification, like query back type patterns as a way to just reuse the power of the existing like REST API that really is at the core of your recommendation?
Oh yes, absolutely. I think having an ecosystem where you're able to quickly apply new features with your primary systems using the smart on FHIR approach is absolutely awesome. I'm in this talk, I was just looking kind of at this tiny aspect of having a primarily document-based form of communication. But you're totally right. If you look beyond this particular use case, you would find tons of reasons on why having a smart on FHIR ecosystem is absolutely worthwhile. I always you know, I do FHIR training. So when I talk about smart on FHIR, I pretty much tell people like, what would you do if a sudden crisis occurred, like the refugee crisis that we had a couple of years ago in Germany, and suddenly you have a lot of patients speaking a language that nobody else in Germany pretty much speaks, and you have to provide information that they can understand. How long do you think it would take for your primary system vendor to come up with a feature that allows you to translate medication information into Syrian or any other language, Ukrainian? How long do you think it would take? The crisis would be long over once you get the update from your vendor that provides your translation services. But if you had a smart on FHIR API, you would easily find a tiny startup that hasn't done anything but translating medical information into Ukrainian for years, and they could come up with a web-based application that you could integrate like in a matter of weeks and fulfill this purpose. And yeah, I think that's totally the value of smart on FHIR, being able to innovate like in an instant.
Thank you. So 2 questions, and then we go to the, so first Graham, and then there's a gentleman in the front. Graham.
First, Graham. Thanks, Simone. And it takes real guts to do a real honest report from the front lines. And I just wanted to tell you how much I appreciate it and recommend to everybody else that this is, you know, a really hard thing to do, to give an honest assessment like this. Thank you very much. And sponsored session, awesome. Well done.
I totally agree. Okay.
Jörg Bleu from Switzerland. Thank you very much for your speech. I feel very sympathetic with your ideas because it's mainly the basic idea what we also approach with development of implementation guides for our exchange formats in Switzerland. One problem is or the advantage what you said, that if you only transfer the questionnaire, it's very simple. But I think one problem is if you only transfer the questionnaire, you don't know which data model is underlying. And I mean, it doesn't have to be a parallel export to send in parallel to the questionnaire the FHIR resources, but sending in parallel the FHIR resources is one method to make sure that the receiver of the whole message knows the underlying data model.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, for us in Germany, the issue is always the data protection. We're never allowed to transmit more information that is absolutely necessary for one particular use case. So kind of sending whole FHIR resources as an attachment kind of situation, which I understand is what you're suggesting, always holds a difficulty that we would have to clean these resources from all the unwanted information or unencouraged information in that particular use case. And that would bring us back to the initial problems that we cannot reuse our resources because there's too much information in them for most of the use cases that we have to fulfill. But I absolutely like the idea. If you have the freedom to do that, if you're not constrained as much as we are in this respect, I think it's a great idea to kind of piggyback this structured information on your questionnaires. When you can always, I think the benefit of questionnaires is that you can start very simple and then you can grow from that. You can start with a really plain and bare bones questionnaire and then add pre-population, add data extraction, add references to other resources rather than populating individual elements. And it allows you to grow more dynamically, I think.
Okay. And with that, thank you, DMI. Thank you, Simone.
Thank you.
Very well done. Very impressive. See you here, 7 o'clock, Uber Nerd Award.